So you had mentioned Admiral Byrd earlier, and he's actually a good one because he relates to Hollow Earth. And that's a good subject when we're talking about aliens, because the idea that, there are extraterrestrial beings living beneath the surface of the Earth.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get you to talk a bit about Hollow Earth, actually, and, how that came to be, leading on to how it connects to extraterrestrials, all of that.
Right. Yeah, the Hollow Earth. I'm thinking how far back to go. We're going to have to go to existence, how and why again.
Of course.
It's a good place to be. But really, when you're dealing with the Earth, it is hollow by nature. Or to be more clear, it has gaps, caves, caverns, opportunities for beings to inhabit a space beneath the surface by nature. So Existence, How and Why is a good book for explaining how the Earth came to be, if that makes sense. There's a couple books I'd point to on this topic. Existence, How and Why. There are more, to be honest, but we'll start with a couple. Existence, How and Why, an actual fact, and a book written in the old school called Shambhala Nagata. Right? So Shambhala Nagata is a good book just to give you details as far as the Hollow Earth, some of the cities beneath the surface, some of the extraterrestrial beings that inhabited these cities. There are even depictions given of these beings. And what Baba Yanon explained to us is how these beings have affected or connected to some of the humanoids we see on the planet today, if that makes sense. So even just as far as genetics, if that makes sense, there are certain abnormalities within the humanoid race. And some of those abnormalities are a result of mixing with extraterrestrial beings. So one, quick example, extra chromosomes. A human being has an extra chromosome. That is a result of a mixture between a being with more chromosomes than a human mixing with a human, and therefore you get something in between. There are certain genetic traits shared between humanoids on the surface and beings beneath the surface. So Baba Yanon went into all of that, and he gave details as far as what those genetic traits are and who links to where and so on and so forth, if that makes sense. So that's a good book for that. Existence, How and Why, as we mentioned earlier, is a book that really walks you through physical creation. And so that creation includes the creation of this planet that we're on, planet Earth, as we call it, Ptah Nun in our Sabaean tones, Tiamat, in Sumerian tones. It's been known by many names. In fact, Tiamat was in what's the movie? Eternals, right?
Something that sounds very similar, like Tiamat, like
right?
the celestial being in there.
Yeah, that's right. The celestial being that belonged to Earth, Tiamat. So different tones for the planet, but he walks us through the creation of this planet and how it came to be in the shape and form we see, we pretty much see today. So I'm thinking where to start. Existence, How and Why, because obviously it walks you through the creation of the black dot, the stars, the suns, onto the other masses in the universe. So we'll start from the planet. But like I say, if you want the detail of how we get to that stage, read the book. So when it comes to planet Earth, one of the first things that is happening, or that was happening when it was first formed, was that it was burning. It had been ignited by the sun, in fact. And so it was burning. And what Baba Yanon explained is that burning, it burned and it burned and it burned until that burning went beneath the surface, right? And towards the center of the globe. To eventually become what we know as the central sun, which those who have looked into the idea of a hollow earth know all about the central sun. If that makes sense. So that burning went beneath the surface. So you had a bunch of chemicals that went beneath and was burning. That would eventually form the central sun. The next thing that happened was the Earth's share of water was pushed into the magnetic field, and it rained and it rained and it rained and it rained, right? So eventually that water followed the burning and went beneath the surface, right? Until it met those chemicals. And when it met those chemicals, obviously you had a reaction. And these reactions began to build until you had a series of explosions. So some explosions might have sent masses flying up and out the atmosphere. They might have been that powerful. And those masses would become other elements of our solar system, if that makes sense. Some of the explosions might have sent masses flying upwards, and they would land in different places on the planet, if that makes sense, to become high places like your mountains, right, your hills, your mounds, etc. And sometimes the explosion would just be enough to push the Earth upwards, but without separation, if that makes sense. So what these explosions did was create gaps, was create caves, create caverns, if that makes sense. And at a later date, beings would come, see these caves and these caverns and these gaps and be like, you know what? Yeah, this is a nice spot. I'm gonna chill here. I'm gonna build my little city here. This
is my spot right here.
This is nice, you know. So some of the gaps will be filled by water, hence you have places such as waterfalls.
Well, yeah.
And some of these gaps, the beings would come and be like, yeah, I like it here. It's chill. So, and remember as well, the same way we see on the surface, you might have, for example, lakes that are naturally formed and man-made lakes that are built to serve a purpose. It's the same way that you have gaps that are naturally formed in the way I've just described. And then you might have a situation where beings come and you know what, yeah, let's expand here, let's build here, let's dig out here and build our city, so on and so forth. So that's really the way that Earth became to be that way, if that makes sense. It's by nature, is what we're saying. When it was first forming, all of this happened by nature. And so Existence and Why, great book to understand that. And Shambhala gives you an understanding of some of the beings that came and set up here, if that makes sense. So on to Admiral Byrd, Admiral Richard E. Byrd. He was an interesting one because he was an explorer, but he was a high-ranking official, right? So he wasn't some random guy that got up one day like, I've seen things.
Not so many anybody.
Yeah, he wasn't even anybody. He was well respected in their world, if that makes sense. So he was a high-ranking official, and he went on an expedition in 1946, 47 type of time, and he went to Antarctica. And so you go to that part of the world, what you're expecting to see, ice, snow, cold temperatures, and so on and so forth.
Yep.
And him and his men were seeing such temperatures. You know, the way Baba Yanun told it when you go back to Shambhala Nagata. That book, he said, yeah, okay, they had a powerful two-way radio on their aircraft. And he was like, yeah, everything's normal. And then one second, and then the next second, they passed through a valley, and suddenly he wasn't seeing ice and snow anymore. The temperature went up 74 degrees Fahrenheit. He started seeing thick forest trees. And he was like, whoa, as you would be. What's going on here? So obviously it was explained that he had found an entrance to a different world, so to speak, to a world beneath the surface. And it's just funny because he wasn't the only one speaking of such things at the time. He's probably the name, I would think, when it comes to Hollow Earth in terms of fame and so on and so forth, but he wasn't the only one speaking of such things. But he is on plenty of interviews, documentaries, so on and so forth. He released a diary. I read the diary, and there were some interesting accounts in his diary of the beings that he met when he went beneath the surface and what they told him, and so on and so forth. So I recommend you can easily find the diary. Just Google it.
Yeah, I got to read that myself. Yeah. Actually, I haven't.
Yeah, definitely read it. But he's not the only name. That's a name I would look into. I'd look into a name called Frank Edwards, a man called Frank Edwards, who was a UFO researcher who actually wrote about Admiral Byrd. I'd look into a man named Matthew Gargan. He was a scientist who was at least partly responsible for discovering a body of water, which shouldn't have been there in Antarctica by what they understood the planet to be. They were like, well, no, this is a cold area. How is this large body of water with warmer temperatures? What's it doing in this part of the world? Yeah. Matthew Gargan, he's quoted as saying, I don't get it, or I don't understand. How could it be here? Another name, Commander David Bunga. You know, so there are names you can look out there. Everything's hush hush, and you know, official bodies might come out like, nah, no chance. Don't know what he's on about. Don't know what that means, so on and so forth. But there is research you can do and evidence that stacks up on that. Okay, yeah, there's something more going on here than what's being reported, and there are elements of our world that we are just kept unawares about, should we say? Yeah. And you have to look into it. But that's one of the easiest ones to look into because it's easy to find information on Admiral Byrd. Sometimes you deal with some of the other names and it can be more difficult to actually find information on them. But that's what I would recommend. I would say when you're dealing with topics like this, often obviously you're going to run into people, Hollow Earth, huh? No, that's crazy. Do your reading first. Yeah. Do your research first. Look into it first. And you come to find, it's not so crazy at all. So yeah, that's what I'd recommend from a Sabian point of view, Existence and Why. And then if you want details, you go back into a previous school, Shambhala and Agartha. And it explains all of that. It explains all of that. Man from Planet Risk is another one.
Yeah.
Where it goes into that. And to be honest, the story I've given you of Admiral Byrd is a light one, because I'm conscious of the fact that we've got Reptu and Ray coming on soon to talk about Hitler, who was another person who knew about cities beneath the surface. And so Admiral Byrd's expeditions in 46, 47 connected with that as well. But I know they're coming on to tell the story, so I'm not gonna tell it first. Yeah. I'm not gonna tell it first. So I recommend looking into that, looking into all those names, and you'll find a stack of evidence that's like, okay, there's definitely more going on that's being revealed. And finally speaking as well, when you go to ancient cultures, you'll find evidence that they knew. So when I'm saying things like so-and-so discovered, I'm talking from their perspective.
Yeah.
Okay. Ancient cultures already knew that there were cities beneath the surface, and already knew that there were extraterrestrials visiting the planet, and already knew that there were extraterrestrials that settled beneath the surface. And you'll find evidence of that if you go to their cultural teachings. Egyptians, Mayans, Hindus, so on and so forth. So yeah, definitely one to look into. But that's a little piece on Hollow Earth and Admiral Byrd. Google him. Definitely
got to do your own research.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah.